Hello class. Today, or in this video, we're going to go over portraiture. Okay, your next assignment is going to be a portrait. What I want you to do is take a selfie. If you don't wish to work from yourself, get someone to sit for you for a moment, take a picture of them, print the picture out. Okay, working from the cell phone is a little problematic because it's such a small screen. Go ahead and take the time to print out an image of your selfie or of the person that you've got posing for you. When you turn in the assignment, send me also a image or a copy of your reference image. Okay, so we're using a photo reference for this assignment, and I'm also going to demonstrate how to lay out the painting, how to begin the painting, how to initiate a portrait. Some of you may have never drawn a portrait before. You may have had little experience with the human face. I'm going to send you through email some tutorials about drawing the human face, and I'm going to demonstrate how to begin the painting today. Now what I've done is I've laid down a color ground. I used burnt sienna and a rag, and I thinned out the paint with turpentine or the odorless mineral spirits, and I just made a coat. This is called a ground. Okay, the white of the gesso coat that's on the primer coat that's on the canvas can be problematic in terms of judging color. And in oil painting, as you may remember, we work from dark to light. We build our darks and we work up to the lights. So it's good to lay down a color ground, and I find this especially helpful with doing portraiture work, which is why I've done it here. I don't always do it with other types of paintings we've covered. We've done still life, we've covered landscape. So this is a helpful step, and I do recommend it. The color palette, let me show you this. Can you see that clearly? Okay, oops, I'm losing my white. The colors we're using, we're bringing back the earth tones, okay? I had you lay them aside for a little while because we were working with color, but now I'm bringing back the earth tones. I've also got my primaries, blue, red, and yellow, and I've got my second primary set, the Hansa yellow, the alizarin crimson, and the cerulean blue. Those are there as options. But we want to initiate the painting using earth tones. And if you have the raw sienna, that's that one there, that peanut butter colored earth tone, that's raw sienna. If you've got that, that is an excellent color to use for portraiture. If you don't have it, that's okay. We can use the burnt sienna. We can make that work as well. As you may recall, the burnt sienna stays very lustrous even when you're tinting it down. Paint everywhere. So we're going to start with some basic drawing. What I'm going to do is use a dark color. In this case, I'm going to use my burnt umber. If you wanted to mix a black, remember that formula, burnt umber and ultramarine blue. But for now, I'm just going to use a burnt umber. And let's look at the photo reference. This is my face. Sorry guys, but that's what I look like. The face is in what's called a 3/4 view. This isn't a full frontal. It's almost a full frontal, but not quite. That means we see all of one side of the face and a portion of the other side of the face. And the line of demarcation is the nose. Where the nose is pointed tells you where the face is looking. So the face is looking away to the left side of the image. And what we do is we use basic shape. I'm going to start out with just a circle, a large circle. And I'm using, actually I'm going to get a bigger brush. I'm going to use a round, hog's hair round. Okay, and then I'm going to make a cone, or a triangle rather. Now that gives me a basic scaffolding to build on. I'm then going to draw an axis line. It doesn't really exist, but human faces are symmetrical, so having an axis line can be helpful. I've placed the axis line just to the left of center Okay, that tells me which way the face is pointed. Next, I'm going to make 3 marks that represent where the eyes go, where the nose goes, and where the mouth will go. Okay, those are just reference marks. From there, I'm going to make a small triangle indicating the direction of the nose, and I'm going to make a smaller circle. Let's move the mouth up and make a. See, you can make adjustments as you go. I just moved the reference line for the mouth. I moved it up, and I'm going to make a circle representing the chin, or where the chin will go. And then I'll make a smaller circle inside the larger circle, and that represents the forehead. Now I'm going to make an oval here on the right side. That'll represent where the ear goes. Eyes. This will represent roughly where the eyes will go. Okay, so that's a layout. That's a very quick layout, and I can throw things in like beard and hair. Okay? It's very simple, basic shape. I'm just making notation of where certain features are. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to block in light and shadow. Okay, blocking things in. We've blocked in quite a bit. We've talked about that quite a bit in the other paintings. Remember the rules of thumb. We start from dark to light. Okay, we work from general to specific. I don't need to do a bunch of detail work early in the painting. I just want to get some generalities going. So, dark to light. I'm going to start with a burnt sienna. And I'm going to make a tint of burnt sienna, but not a very high key tint. And I'm going to throw just a little bit of blue into the burnt sienna so I get a nice warm gray. Ta-da! There we go. Now remember, we're starting with an earth tone underpainting. Remember that from the second painting? This is the time for that. This is the time where we break out the earth tones. Earth tone underpainting will introduce color as we go. So, looking at my reference, what's happening is light. There's a huge light source up here in the upper left. I'm not going to worry about that so much. But looking at the face, light is predominantly coming from the upper right and hitting the face. That means the left side of the face is more in shadow than the right side. That's relative, okay? These aren't really extreme lighting conditions I'm working with. And I'm blocking it in. I'm just blocking in where the shadow goes. Now, that's a fairly dark shadow. Darker than I really want to get. So I'm going to actually introduce a little bit of cadmium red into my color combination. So I'll go from that cool, warm, well, cooler shadow compared to what I've got now, but it was that warm burnt sienna, where I had burnt sienna blue and white, to something that is warmer still. So I'm already starting to introduce color into the earth tone underpainting. Might be a little premature, but I want to jump ahead some. Shadow, where the eye will go. Remember, you can always lighten, all right? It's easier to bring in light on top of dark than it is to try to darken on top of light. I'm actually going to make a little bit of an orange and make an orange tint. So I've got 3 ranges of color going on now. And I'm just blocking in the face. Now for the hair, for the moment, I'm going to use burnt sienna, and I'm going to block in the shadows, the darker areas of the beard and the hair. We do need to deal with the background to some extent. Okay, space is always an issue. There's always something we want to deal with. So we're going to have to get into that in just a little bit. But I want to set up the major relationships on this face before I start getting into issues of background. It doesn't look like much right now, does it? Well, that's all right. We're moving from general to specific. We're blocking things in, we're keeping it simple, and we'll get more specific as we go. Now, I'm going to introduce some red here, and I'm actually going to draw back onto this. No, I'm not. I'm going to get some raw sienna, a little red on my brush, that's okay, and we're going to get into his beard here. Mustache. Burnt sienna, a little bit of umber. The great thing about the earth tones is value scale plays out right in front of you. You're running from burnt umber to yellow ochre, burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, yellow ochre. So you've already got a value scale happening in front of you on the palette, and then you can just tweak it from there on the painting. It's okay if you get too dark at first, okay? That's fine. We're working from dark to light. So if it's a little on the dark side at first, you can always lighten it up as you go. Now, some general principles about the face. The eyes tend to line up with the inner ear. Now, this is just a generality. It's not always universally true, but it's a rule of thumb you can use when building a face. The bottom of the ear tends to be in line with the bottom of the nose. That's also a generality. The mouth tends to be about halfway between the bottom of the nose and the chin. And of course, here on this image, the chin is extended because of this fine fellow's beard pushing down. Okay, so those are just some general rules of thumb that you can use to help you plot out where things belong on your painting. Now, I'm going to come back in with some red, and I'm going to draw a few things. The space between the eyebrows, you can generalize that as an inverted triangle, okay? And then the nose itself can be a triangle. And the nostril, we only see one nostril because this is a 3/4 view. That's a smaller triangle. And we get the eyebrow. Not much going on with the eyebrows. I used to have eyebrows once upon a time. And as I got older, they went away. Okay. And the line of the hair, I'm actually going to make that mix black for just a second. And let's get into, we don't see the top lip so much because it's obstructed by this mustache. I'm going to get a tint going here. I'm going to see light hits the chin right there. You'll notice that red and burnt sienna and white can make a flesh tone, and then of course you can make that flesh tone darker by adding more burnt sienna. You can cool it down by adding a little blue. Okay, so just depending on the skin tone that you're dealing with, that recipe, red, burnt sienna, and white, and if need be a little blue, that works pretty well. The raw sienna with some white, if I tint the raw sienna, that makes a pretty good flesh tone. Again, how dark you need it depends. You know, if you need it darker, add more burnt sienna. You can throw down just a touch of blue and cool it off even further. That gives you tonal values. Doesn't always give you color. Okay, color's a different thing. That's something we've been working with. You can introduce color into the earth tones. You can introduce color on top of the earth tones. I'm actually taking some blue now, and I'm going to work on these eyes right here. Again, I'm still generalizing. I'm not being overly specific at the moment. I just want to make some estimations. Don't be afraid of eyes, okay? One of the reasons I'm having you work from a photographic source for this painting, faces can be intimidating. Human beings, like all primates actually, transmit a lot of information through through the facial expressions. Our faces are very expressive. We communicate a lot of information to each other through the face. And if you're not an experienced portrait painter, that can get intimidating. Models tend to wiggle, they get itches, they got to get up and use the restroom. Sometimes they don't show up for painting sessions. It can be frustrating. So let's do ourselves a favor and learn how to properly use a photographic source. Most of you have probably been drawing from photographic sources for some time. Let's do it properly. What does that mean, properly? Well, properly, using a photographic source properly means understanding that the photograph can give us a lot of information about where things are in relation to each other. It can tell us about value. It can give us a little bit of information about color. But once you're actually making the painting, that's a whole other experience. That's a whole other ballgame. The photograph is not the measure of the painting. What does that mean? That means that you don't judge the quality of a painting by how much of a photograph it looks like. Okay? The photograph is just a reference. Where can I take this now? What else can I do with it? What can I say with paint that I can't say with, a digital image or a print? Oh yeah, and your digital images on your cell phone are very different from a printed image. You're staring at little dots of light when you're looking at your cell phone or a digital image. And when you're looking at a printed image, that's a whole other thing too. So we need to understand how these different types of imaging systems read, how they read to us as human beings, how our perception of something is changed. Okay, a photograph is not any more true than a painting is. It's just a different type of truth. And a painting in some ways could be or can be more true than a photograph. It's a different type of truth. You could argue that both the photograph and the painting are lies. That's not true. That's not how that goes. That's not what was really happening. Right, you're right. It's not. But we can express different ideas about what we experienced through a painting and different ideas through a photograph. Okay, so that's today's sermon. Anyway, using the photograph as a reference source, I'm able to make decisions about value, about where certain values are in relation to each other, and about how they relate to each other in order to make this likeness. Now you can see the painting has advanced. Even while I've been jabbering away, the painting's advanced some. I've got a pretty good series of shadows. I've got the hair marked out. It's not fully developed. We'll get to that later. What I want to do now is concentrate eyes, nose, mouth area. Okay, that whole area. I want to set that up. So having the earth tone underpainting in place, and I can see where the shadows are, I want to start to use more color now to develop this. This is all kind of muddied right now. There's a few light areas blocked in, but the color's not very sharp. What I want to do is, and I'm rather light complected, I'm a pretty pale fellow, so I'm going to make an orange. I'm going to make a tint of orange, and it's got a little bit of burnt sienna mixed into it. And now I'm going to start to block out where some of the lighter areas are, only I'm going to use color to do this. Light is hitting the right side of the face, and I'm going to use that light to build that cheek. There's this area that comes up to the nose, We're going to leave the eye mostly dark for the moment. There's this little piece under the nostril and above the mustache. I'm sure there's correct anatomical names for all these areas of the face, but not going to help me at the moment. I've got this spot of light that was happening down here on the chin. I already put that in. There it is. The ball of the nose, which I'm going to make just a little darker in value. I've added a little more red to my mix. And I had that red outline. Anytime you start to lose things, now I'm working with blocks of different color tone values right now, but anytime you start to lose something and you need to bring it back, you need to find it again, pick up a brush, a small brush, choose your color, probably a red or a blue or one of the earth tones, and go back in and draw. Just redraw it. You're building on top of the work you've previously done. So there's this constant give and take through the process. Light on top of dark. Now let's get into the forehead a little bit. The shadowed areas are a little cooler than I want right now. I needed them that way before, but at the moment it's not helping. So I want to add something to that. I'm going to make a red-orange, a tint of red-orange. There's actually a little bit of my sienna, a little bit of umber actually, inside that red-orange. And I'm going to start to carve out some of these other areas. Now, one of the things that is helpful to remember when you're using paint, especially in the early stages of the painting, is that it's not about drawing things in perfectly and then adding the right color. You're not coloring in between the lines. This isn't a coloring book. You're using blocks of color to develop form, and it is good to remember things like a shadow has a specific color to it. A shadow has a shape, all right? So what I'm trying to get at is that we're using color shapes. I'm not going to come in here and paint out every little hair in the beard. That's not helpful, and it won't accomplish anything anyway. What I can do is recognize the shape of a given color, try to judge its value, how light or dark it is, try to make some judgment about its tonality, how warm or cool it is, and then also its color. What color is a given shadow or a given light area? And through these judgments, we can begin to make the features begin to take shape. Now, I've already moved in from, here's what I've done so far. I've laid in that underpainting. I've still got some of the underpainting showing. I'm making use of that to show where shadows are. I've blocked in some of the lighter areas, not all of them, but some of them. And now I'm actually starting to make some smaller adjustments. Okay? We move from the general to the specific. Remember that one? That's something we've talked about in some of our other videos and demonstrations and emails. And by the way, thank you guys this semester for cooperating and playing along. You've been real good about keeping the email conversations coming. I get a little behind on grading at times because all those assignments come in at once, and but I do work to get caught up on responding to you. We're essentially functioning asymmetrically. I'm making these demonstration videos, and then we're communicating through email, and we're making it work. It's not always the optimum way to approach things. I opted not to use Zoom meetings because I wasn't sure that would really work well for what we were doing. The demonstration videos, you're able to watch them on your time, multiple times, re-reference them, and I think that's probably the most helpful way to proceed. Anyway, thank you for your participation is what I'm trying to say. All right, back to business. So what I'm doing now is I'm working with a range of oranges, red oranges, tints of red orange, tints of orange, mixed to some extent with my earth tones. I'm starting to make more use out of the raw sienna, and we're trying to get some of the smaller relationships that are going on this face. Remember what I said about drawing? I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to come in, I'm going to draw some of this hair. Okay. I'm going to work the right side of his face here, and I want to get into that ear just a little bit. I want to set that up, and then we'll get back into his eyes. I think that'll be important to show you for the demonstration. And then we're going to talk about the background, okay? We need to make some decisions about the background, and there's a number of, well, there's two options I'm thinking of that I want to talk to you about. I'm going to show you one and discuss the other. How's that? Now, remember, at this point in the semester, we actually have a wide range of color available to us. We have the three primaries, the cad yellow, cad red, ultramarine blue. We introduced some other primary alternatives, alizarin crimson, which makes great violets, the Hansa yellow, which makes really, really good, cool yellows and very cool oranges, the cerulean blue, which is a, I want to say it's a warmer blue than the ultramarine. I never really can remember which one's warm, which one's cool. They're both blue, you know. Yeah, the cerulean's warmer, that's the case. And you can do good things with the cerulean blue. For lighter skinned persons, such as myself, you may notice that the shadows can be expressed through pale blue tints, and the cerulean blue becomes a good option. Darker complected persons, you can make a really good flesh tone by mixing red orange, adding a little bit of ultramarine blue so you get a tone, and then you can tint that, and you can also re-redden it if need be, and you get a really, really sound, good flesh tone that's based on a color. You can also do something similar, at least it's similar in its tone, using the burnt sienna, but you won't have as rich of a range of color to work with. The problem with the earth tones, while they're very good for setting up tonal relationships and value relationships, they're not very deep. You reach a point where all you can do with the color is get it lighter. It's not really going to give you as rich of a color experience as working with, you know, the complementary pairings and the tints and using the true color. So as the painting advances, boy, his nose is horrible. As the painting advances, shift into using more color, okay? I'm actually going to get this shadow red. There's a shadow of the nose on the cheek. And because the light's fairly diffuse, it's not a real strong light, it's subtle. Now, what I do, notice how my colors aren't all blended, okay? That's called broken color. I'm not blending finely all the colors very smoothly. That is a technique. That is an option. That's something that can be done. I tend not to do that. What I'm doing is called broken color. The color sits. It's butted up against. It's layered. And I'm letting the color layers work against each other. And what happens is, in the eye of the viewer, in the mind of the viewer, is called optical mixing. Okay? Now I'm going to introduce a little bit of cerulean blue here. Optical mixing. That's where the viewer's eye, the mind's eye of the viewer reads the color as blending together, even though it's really not. Now, what I'm doing on my palette, I don't know if the camera can see it, so I'll talk you through it. I've taken some cerulean blue, I've made a tint of cerulean blue, I've done that tint of cerulean blue on top of some of those orangey tints I was making. I added a touch of red to the cerulean blue tint, and I'm making a color for a shadow. So the color is cooler, it's darker than some of the lighter tones, it's not as dark as the earth tones that I was using. I'm putting it on gently and blending it into the wet paint that's underneath. That's wet on wet. And so what I'm going for, it's arguable as to whether or not it's succeeding. What I'm going for is a cool tonal shadow that in terms of its color is a bit of an opposite from the other side. Now it's probably a little lighter than I want, so I'm going to come back in and reassert some of the darks in just a moment. Okay, so my cerulean blue works real well against all those orange tints and pinks and tinted earth tones, and I get a nice cool shadow. And I'm not too worried about the specifics at the moment about its shape. I can get that. I can always sharpen things up. Now I'm taking some ultramarine blue and adding it to that tint I just made, that shadow tint, and I'm going to color this shadow in. I'm adding color on top of what had been an earth tone shadow. So I'm just blocking out this whole area of shadow that goes from the right eye through the bridge of the nose and onto the left side. And again, if we lose a shape, that's fine. If we lose a shape for a while, no biggie, because we're going to come back and reassert it in a little bit. Let's see, red and blue is a tint, bring it over, some of that orange, too much. What I'm trying to do is mix up a good dark so I can get the mustache. All that work for a mustache. Vanity, vanity. Okay, now, by the way, I'm using a hog's hair right here. This is a flat hog's hair. Not the best, okay? When you want to get finer details or finer relationships or smaller relationships, it's a good idea to use a sable brush or sableine, a softer brush. I'm focusing on blocking things in, so I've just been sticking with this smaller, oh, that's terrible, this smaller hog's hair. Let's see. The shadow under the eye, dark circles under the eye. Mr. Lyles hasn't been sleeping well. Got dark circles under the eye. Okay. I'm losing the eye for a while. That's all right. Lose it. Build it, break it, build it again. Okay? That's what you do. Don't try to hang on to all the little details all the way through the painting. Don't fret that. Don't worry about that. All those reference marks you made at the beginning of the painting, that's all they are, is reference marks. That's all they are, reference. And we're going to build things up again and again and again. We're going to lose it, we're going to build it, we're going to lose it, we're going to build it. I'm going to get a softer brush from my Carol here. And I'm going to get some red. I'm going to make a red-orange. Red-orange with a little bit of, just a little bit of alizarin. Let's darken that up. It makes its value darker and it makes it also brighter simultaneously. It's magic. Get bright and dark. Alright, so eye again. Let's do a little more blue in there. My eyes aren't blue, I'm just trying to get a value. Reshape this area of the shadow. So right now at this stage in the painting, I'm reasserting some of the darker areas, trying to reassert the forms or some of the features, and then from there I can come back in and build light again on top of that. Light, dark, light, dark, dark, light. You work from dark to light. Every layer, dark to light. Set up your darks, build your lights. Set up your darks, build your lights. Let's highlight this earlobe. Let's do this brush. Earlobe. Not every single square inch of the painting has to be dealt with the exact same way. Okay? You're telling the viewer where to look and when and how long to stay there. And the more developed a given area is, the longer the eye sits in a specific area. And sometimes just a quick notation says more than if you spent 12 hours going over it again and again and again and again. It's poetry, not prose, right? Worst thing in the world is to have a lover who explains and explains and explains and explains. No! Say it once, say it nice, and move on. Right? Also, just another analogy, base coats. Remember all those earth tones that we used at the beginning, and then we started to move away? You're setting up a base. Those of you who have experience with makeup, you know what I'm talking about. Base. You set up a base, and then you build on top of it, right? Same thing with portrait painting. You set up your base, and you build on top of it. Now, that's way too strong. So let's. I'm going to do that, and then we'll talk about the background. Yeah, too white. There we go. And then that right there. You can also blend color on the painting. You mix a lot of color on your palette, and then you introduce it to the painting. Well, you can actually do some blending on the painting. Introduce a color and blend it in. There's a bridge of the nose. And I want to reassert the edge of that nose, how it goes into the cheek. So I'm going to use a little bit of red. I want to make a red line. I need some more oil in my red. Now, what do you think? I'll tell you right now. This has a long way to go, folks. It ain't even close to being there. But it's a good start. Okay? And that's what I wanted to show you. How to get a good start. Now, that nose is way wrong. That nose is bugging me. Hold on, bear with me. Let me just adjust this. Still not right, but better. Okay, so that's a start. Underpainting, earth tones, introduced some color with tints, started to establish shadows, worked from general to more specific, laying it out. Now, background. What do we do about the background? I want you to deal with the background. Now, yes, I had a tonal ground here. Tonal ground refers to this coat of burnt sienna that I put on the canvas. I let it dry. It's good to have a color ground, an earth tone ground, especially when working with portraits, because it forces you to build up to your lights. Your eye is not fighting the white of the canvas. That can be very frustrating to try to judge. Now we still need to deal with the background. A neoclassical approach, and all of you have seen it, you know what it is, even though you may not know what it was you were looking at. A neoclassical approach is to deal with the background as a field, as a value field, okay? Light's coming in from the upper right, hitting the right side of the head, which means the left side is in shadow. Light's traveling in this direction, so the left side is going to be a lighter tonal value than the right side. Now, I'm going to show this to you, so It's one thing to say it, now I'm going to show it. I'm actually mixing up a gray using some burnt sienna, some ultramarine blue. I'm using burnt sienna because I want my gray to be a little more warm than it would be if I was using burnt umber. Burnt umber, everybody likes burnt umber for some reason. I think burnt umber tends to be rather flat. It's a good dark chocolatey color, yes, but if you're trying to make blacks, you know, I showed you how to use it to make blacks, but if you're trying to make shadows, it tends to be a little too warm. And even when you mix a black, I think it tends to be a little too flat. So if you want a gray, I like burnt sienna, at least for this type of thing. So I've made up a gray, and I'm going to make it a fairly light gray, fairly high key in value. So I want to show you how it sits against the shadowed area of the face. What I'm looking for is a background gray that is lighter than the left side of the head. Okay? And I'm demonstrating this to you backwards, I'm sorry to say. I should have set up the dark first, but it'll work. I'm going to use this light color to also carve out the edge of the head. Now, as I go higher in the picture plane, I'm going to let that shadow get darker. I'm going to cool it down and it'll be a little darker. Again, we don't have to have the fine blended edges yet, okay? We may want to do that later. That may be a choice. But for the moment, I want to block out these zones. So what it will look like is that light is penetrating the canvas, hitting the head, and moving past the head into the space behind the head. Make a choice here. Yep, there. As I move to the left, and again, remember I just told you I made a boo-boo and did this backwards. But as I move to the left, I'm going to make the area darker. Now, if you look on my diagram, my photograph, my reference source, that's not what's happening up there. At least not over there. Look, the light's coming from above and the left. And I'm getting some light from the right and in front. That's what's illuminating the face. But there's this strong light from the fluorescent lights of my office. But I'm not worried about that. I'm making up a different scenario on the painting. And that's kind of the point. On the right side, I'm going to make a cooler, darker, tonal shadow area. So ideally what we get is this soft saturation of light on the left side. Light's coming in from the right, hitting the head, going past the head, moving down into the background on the left. We want to do it in a way that's unobtrusive. If you weren't painting it, you wouldn't be paying attention to it. All right? All of you, you may not know this, you may not have consciously been aware of this, but all of you have seen this technique. All right? Every time the school photographer came to your school to take your little picture for the annual, for the yearbook, this is what was going on. Okay? They have that gray paper background that's sometimes been daubed with paint or something. I just dropped my brush. All right? This is what was happening. Studio portraiture. And guess where they got it from? You can take this technique all the way back to the 1600s. Dutch portrait painters. Rembrandt van Rijn comes to mind. Go look him up. This is what they were doing. Okay? Setting up a background. It's not a flat background. It reads a space. Okay? It absolutely reads a space, but it's unobtrusive. It's not the point of the picture. It just establishes enough of a space so that the head, the portrait of the sitter, the person you're your painting, they actually exist in space. But it doesn't detract from the face. It doesn't take you away from the face. So this is one way to handle space. And we call it background, but that's really a misnomer. What we're dealing with is space, ladies and gentlemen. Space. Where things are in relation to each other, the illusion of depth of field, all of that is space. All right? We want to contend with space. Now, I'm going to lighten that up more, and I'm going to brighten it up more. How am I going to brighten it up? Yellow, yellow, white, burnt sienna, yeah, raw sienna. Now I'm putting in burnt sienna. A little bit of blue. Oil. Oil makes it go. Okay, and now. And I'm just hitting it, trying to unload the brush by rolling it. That's how you can do that. There's a technical tip. Roll the brush. There we go. Okay, ta-da. That's one way to handle it. Another way to handle it would be, let's build a real space. I've got space, the face is in a room, there's stuff happening behind. I can actually paint the room. I can actually include elements from the actual space. Or I could invent a space, So you do need to deal with background in some way. All right, either use this classical, neoclassical technique that I just demonstrated, or actually reference an actual space. You can document a space. Okay, just because the head is occurring in one space in a photograph doesn't mean it has to occur in the same space in the painting. But document what you do. Document, document, document. I'm almost at a stopping point. The painting's nowhere near done. It's got a long way to go. I don't think I've handled the cheeks really all that well. So that's what I would do next, is concentrate on refining some of these relationships and getting a better likeness out of it. But that's the basics. That's enough to get started with. That's enough to play with. And that's what you're doing. Don't let yourself be intimidated. It's just paint. Okay? It's just paint. Shapes, color, value. That's what you're dealing with. And you're not going to get it right the first time. I just made that lower lip a horrible color. My lips are blue. I'm suffocating. You're not going to get it right the first time. You're not trying to get it right the first time. The first time you're just trying to block things in. Get it blocked in. Give yourself information to work with. Once you've got that information on the canvas, then we can start to shape it. We can start to move it around. We can start to make adjustments. Keep working the process, and this is a process. Keep working the process until you're satisfied with the results. Okay? I will send you out an email that has some face drawing tutorials. If you've never drawn a face before, go through the tutorials, do some practice in a sketchbook, play with drawing faces. I'll also include information like due dates, because we'll need to know due dates. We're coming up on the halfway point of November. We'll hit Thanksgiving. We'll come back from Thanksgiving, and then it's final stuff. And very likely what I'll try to do is get out instructions for the final assignments pretty soon, that we've got plenty of time to work on it. I've not talked about below the face. Let me do that real quick. Yes, I want you to do below the face. The portrait is the thing, but let's talk about below the face. There's a neck, right? There is a neck. There's such a thing as a neck. Let's paint that in. He's wearing a shirt, right? He's got a shirt on. Cerulean tint. Tone it down. And I'm just blocking things in, guys, okay? This needs to be much more developed. I'm just blocking it in. Block things in, then you can work on developing it further as needed. Okay, that gives me a little something to work with. Long way to go. But it's a start, okay? So, portrait painting. Figuration. We're going to deal with portraiture. If you have questions, email me. All right. That's it.